So, I'm going to be producing something like this, which is like a reference sheet of techniques and materials that we've used to help us create our piece of work. And all I've used in this is different strengths of coffee. So I've got one here that's really strong, really syrupy, one that's got more dilute, and I've got a bit of water. I've got some coffee in a little jar, paintbrush, and of course the trusty old tea light here. Right, and I'm going to be popping that out to use it. Oh, and the tissue. Need tissue. Just in case you want to take some of the coffee off. Whoops. So, to start with then, let's look at creating some different tones with coffee. So I've got my piece of paper. Now, this is just cartridge paper, which I got out of an old sketchbook. Or if you have got it, watercolour paper is best, really. So to start with, I'm going to, just to help me remember, I'm doing it for Gems in the Dunes. And that I'm using coffee and candles. Right, so starting, I've got my thickest coffee here and I've got my brush. Now, depending on how you hold the brush will depend on the effects that you get. So to start with, I'm going to hold it because I want to control it as if I'm going to write with it. So I'm going to load the brush. That means just kind of diddle it in the coffee. I don't know if diddle's a word, but there you go. I've got it quite full of the coffee there. And I've made this with, I've let it cool down. It was hot coffee and I just made it as strong as I could. And it's loaded. I'm going to hold the paper still with the hand. And I'm just moving my fingers. Can you see my hand is staying still? And just my fingers are moving. So I'm doing quite a large area, about, I don't know, I suppose about 5 centimetres big. Back into the coffee. It's almost dripping off because I want this really nice and dark, this first section. Doesn't matter if it's streaky. Now to make the next bit, I'm going to make it a tiny bit lighter. So I'm not going to load the brush as much. And again, about 5 centimetres big. Just moving my fingers. And for this one, see it's a little bit lighter. While it's still wet, I'm going to take some of the coffee and crumble it in. Yeah, it smells quite nice. If you like the smell of coffee, it's nice. And as it gets wet, you can see the coffee's kind of reacting with the wet surface there. And for the last bit, I've still got a dirty brush. It's still got coffee on it, and I'm just going to wet it. So into the just the water there, and this is going to give me a really nice light wash. Whoops. So I've got 3 tones, and this where I've tried to create a texture. Now let's see if we can go from dark to light with a wash. So I'm going to start back into the really thick coffee, loading up the brush, and then I'm going to do a streak. Oh, that's nice, isn't it? And you see, again, I'm just moving my fingers. Streak about this wide. Now into the water, touch the edge of the pot to get a bit of the extra off, and then I'm going to try and drag it across. Can you see it getting lighter already? Back into the water, some of the extra off, and it's getting lighter and lighter, so you're getting a really nice gradual effect. Just move that over a bit more, keeping it nice and wide. So getting this lovely kind of sepia tone as you're going across. I will leave that to dry. Now, candle. Okay, so I'm popping that out. You can see I've used it before. You've really got to press on quite hard. The wax in these candles, for some reason, is quite soft and it's almost greasy. It's not the most expensive candle I've ever bought, I must say. But you have got to press on quite hard, otherwise when you try and paint over it with the coffee, it'll just cover it up. So this is going to help us create the light areas in the painting, which will be maybe the clouds or little bits of the grasses and things, or where the lights hit the water. So to start with, I'm going to use kind of the side, and this is going to be for the clouds. So I'm really pressing on quite hard. Whoops. I'm just leaving it off there. Kind of like just cloudy shapes, I don't know. You can't see what you're doing, but it doesn't matter. Then I'm going to switch to the edge, find an edge which is a little bit pointy still, and I'm going to do some lines across them. Again, I'm pressing on quite hard but lifting it up here and there, and you won't be able to see what you've done until the end. Ooh, just like magic. Finally, let's see if we can get some grasses going on. So again, using the edge, I'm almost from the bottom and I'm kind of flicking it up, flicking the thing up and changing different directions, thinking about it as little pieces of grass, pressing on quite hard, still trying to hold the paper still. Whoops, hold the paper still with my other hand. You can see what I'm doing, yeah. Right, that's about enough. And let's see what we've got. So we're going to go for a medium kind of wash. I'm going to go not in the darkest one and see what we get. You've got to be gentle, and you can see this time I'm holding the brush slightly differently, holding it near to the bottom. A bit dark that, so into the water and really gentle. If you're not gentle, you're going to rub away. I've just gone back into the medium tone there. You're going to rub away what you've done. You can see the wax, bit of water, bit of coffee, is resisting the water in the paint. So here comes the stripes. Whoops. Let's see what we've got. Yeah, and there's little lumps of wet. Ah, here's the grass, yeah, appearing. It's happening, it's all happening. I did press on quite hard. That's quite a nice result, yeah. And you can see it's kind of drawing back from it. This is drying off. Then while it's still wet, I'm going to sprinkle in some of the coffee to create that kind of nice textured effect down the bottom. Oh, it's sticking to the wax on my fingers. Not quite like that though. Quite like the effect, I mean, not the feeling. Whoa, there's a big lump. Whoops. Right. And as it dries, you get these nice kind of puddles here and there. So we'll leave that to dry and go on to another technique. Okay. So the next stage. So we've just done this and it's still quite wet. Let's have a look at some of the finished pieces. So if we're looking at this, this is the technique that we've just done. The resist technique. You can see I've used it in the clouds here and there where it looks maybe like it's raining a bit in the distance. Here it's on the water there. It's gone quite speckled and nice. And this other painting. Okay, you can see it's maybe a little bit more contrast on this. We've got it in the sky here, shining on the water. This is where the wax is here in the grasses and the scrubland at the front. So we're going to look now at two more techniques. This one, the first one is using a toothbrush to create this kind of speckled rough effect, and also little bits of scrap paper to create like a mask to create this where the grasses are coming up. So we'll look at that, and also wet in wet. So where the darker areas are, I've then gone back and added some coffee while it was still wet and let it kind of soak into it. So we'll need some scrap paper now, and I've got a bit here. So I'm going to tear a little bit off, and I've got my scissors handy. So just try not to get the want it to stick in that. You can see the way the coffee is reacting as well, which is quite nice. So I'm going to cut into it because this is going to become like a stencil, I suppose, for the grass. And I'm cutting some nice thin kind of slivers, and I'm doing it quickly, but you can take your time a bit more. Just turn it over. You want some nice thin kind of naturalish points and curves for the different grass shapes. Okay, and as we're going along there, let's create the movement in the grasses. Nearly ready to get rid. Okay, so scissors down. Let's get rid of some of these bits. And just pull them out and put them to one side. That's a chunky bit there. Let's get rid of that. Come here. Where's it gone? Happy with that. Let's have a look. Get rid of that one. Just here and there. It's going to look quite rough, so that's what you want really. Just pick some of the bits out so you've got like quite a nice stencil to work with. And any hard edges, you want to get rid of them. Okay, let's have a look. Yep, happy with that. So you're going to use the strongest coffee and the toothbrush. This is where your tissue comes in handy, because it's going to get messy. If you haven't put any newspaper down, I would. Well, I have. So toothbrush, strong coffee, bit of tissue. It's going to get more messy. And let's think we're going to put it. So it is still quite wet. So toothbrush. Oh, it's nearly run out now. It's in there to test it out. So this is the technique that you're using. It's going to get your thumb mucky. You're kind of spraying it like that. So I'm going to put this down where I want the grass to go. I'm getting quite close, and this is the strongest coffee. Getting quite a nice soft effect. Oh yeah, that's nice. Move it over, a bit more coffee, get rid of some of it. A bit more spattering. Let it down. So it's obviously where the stencil is, it's stopping it going there. And I think when we come to make your actual paintings, we'll be working 2 at a time, so it'll dry a bit more. So while this is drying off a little bit more, because I want to see if we can get like a harder edge there, I'm going to go back to that I was saying about the wet in wet. So I'm going back to the strong coffee, and let's have a look. Like on some of these images, you can see where there's like almost a shadow under the cloud, so it looks as if maybe the sun is breaking underneath. And I was looking at, I think this is kind of this image, so hopefully you can see it is similar, like a zoomed in section from that. So strong coffee, and looking underneath, and I'm holding the brush quite flat here and kind of in the middle, and again it's loaded with the coffee. I keep nearly saying paint, but it's not, obviously it's coffee. And you're letting it kind of almost dribble onto the page. Now if it does dribble, yeah, oh my goodness, and you've made a terrible error, well, you don't like it maybe, this is when, again, you can use your tissue and just take it off. Or if you had a spare brush, say you made another mistake, oh dear, and you had a spare paintbrush just lying around, I've got a little one here, you can sometimes see the way it just almost acts like a sponge. Just clean the paintbrush, it's a dry paintbrush, and you can just take it off one way or another, but it doesn't matter. So back to adding in the dark areas. So you could look for areas of contrast, and if you might think that this is a bit too hard here, maybe you've got like a hard edge there and you don't like it, if you wet your brush, and again you don't want it dripping wet, so I've just clean the brush in the water and get rid of some of the water, maybe dab it on there a bit more, just touch the edge of it, and you should be able to fade your edge out. So if you ever get, like, while it's still damp or wet, if you ever get any hard edges and you want to fade them out, you can do that. It's gone a bit pale, I think, maybe in some bits, so darken them up again. Sometimes when I'm doing things like this, using watercolour or coffee, if you haven't got any watercolour lying around, I'll use a hairdryer, so you can hairdry it in between. So I think I'm going to do that now, hairdryer, and then show you how to use the masks a little bit stronger to get like a crisper edge. Right. Right, so I've hairdried it slightly. Top tip, don't get it too close because it'll melt the wax. I did it a little bit here, and then if you melt the wax, sometimes it kind of goes into the paper and makes the paper look a bit transparent, which is, if that's effect you're going for, go for it, but that's not what I want in this case. So I've got my mask back here, it's curled up a bit. This is still a little tiny bit damp, but not here where I want to get the effect. Just move it up a bit. Right, so I've got my strong coffee, I just had to make a bit more. and sleeves up. Toothbrush. So let's put this where I'm going to try and create the mask effect. I think I'll put it in the middle there. Just flatten it out. It's curled up, like I say. Right, here we go. So into the coffee. Get rid of some of the excess. Let's just check it. Seems a bit thin. Let's see. Right. I'm going to get it really close. I think it is a bit thin. Well, we'll see. Really close and spatter it. Now, you might have to try different toothbrushes to see which works better. So I've put quite a lot on there. And let's lift it up and see if I've got a nice crisp effect. Oh yes. Can you see there where it's created like the points? So you can do a couple of them. And then this is the painted side. What I'm going to try, this bit here is a bit plain. I'm going to flip it over and print it almost. So I'm just gently touching it down onto the page. And hopefully it'll leave like a coffee print of the other side. Oh yeah, see those like sharp edges? So let's try it over here. So we're creating an impression of these kind of waving grasses that we've got going on in the dunes. Quite messy, quite sticky. Let's have a look. Oh, that's a nice one. So we've got this kind of really rough, and again, when it's drier, or if you dry it off with a hairdryer, you can keep adding bits to it. Like you can see on the finished ones, where I've really like added pieces in, and I've also gone back and added in little bits of darker areas. And on this one, I think, I've done something that we can do later called dry brushing. See, it's really scratchy here, but this is on thicker paper. This is a watercolour paper, and that's just creates all these nice textures. So you've got the contrast between the kind of wild sky and the really rough grass. So that technique, the flicking, like using the stencil, of flicking and then turning the stencil over and printing it, that's that technique. So now we'll be looking at creating finished pieces. So, looking to think which sections of our image are we going to use to create a final piece. So this is the whole image. It's a photograph that I took down at Ainsdale when we were allowed to travel, which at the moment, not just yet, but soon, fingers crossed soon. And what I was really liking here was the contrast with on the skies here, and the sun's just breaking through the clouds there. You can see where the sun's just picking up on some of the distant waves there. Then we've got like the highlights here and there on the grasses, and all the footprints in the sand, kind of showing the story of the dunes where people have been walking on the sand. But I didn't want to do the whole image, so let's think about your composition, how you're going to compose it, how you can kind of zoom in on a particular section. So I'm going to use just scrap paper to help me, and I think maybe like a central section. So let's get rid of a bit of the sky, and then a bit more paper like that, and you can move it around till you're happy. Stay there, you're happy with your composition. So I might do so. Let's have a look. Yep, I think something like that. So I'm happy with that. It'll take a bit longer to do it, of course, and you might want to use like a zoom function on your camera. I would always, while we're doing this type of work, I'd make sure I've got just black and white images to work from. I need a straight line there, don't I? Don't. On the side of my paper. About there, yeah. Just for this type of work, a black and white image is easier to work from because it just helps you see the tones, because we're really looking to get contrast and maybe even exaggerate or change it. Remember, we're not trying to replicate this, we're just using this to give us some inspiration for a final piece. So my piece I did before is almost dry, still a little bit sticky coffee fingers, but that's okay. So let's get that out of the way where I can still see it. You're going to need a pencil, and let's got that to hand here. So this is the only bit of a drawing really you're going to be doing. So I'm going to decide the horizon is a little bit above the centre, so it's roughly there, and I'm holding the pencil loosely in the middle, not as if I'm going to write with it, loosely so I can get a softer line, and then really lightly, because you don't really want to be able to see these pencil lines. I'm just following the shape a bit along now. Right, so now I need to look at my picture. Where is it light, the image I'm working from? Where is it light and where is it dark? So I can see there's a really light patch about here. So I'm going to press on with the candle, with the tea light, using the side of it. That's where the sun is. And again, you can't see what you're doing. So exciting really, because I just like to get revealed at the end. So I'm pressing on quite hard. So they're going to be my clouds. So I'm just looking up at the drawing. I've got the image kind of stuffed over there, and then I've got, using the side like we did before, to create some lines in the sea, and it's only an impression of it, so a little bit of scribble there. Now onto the dunes, some flicks of wax. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. Whoops, right, in a right mess here. It's quite windy today as well, so at least it's sunny. Right, changing the directions, pressing on. Let's do some footprints and stuff down here. Bit of a wax scribble. You must probably thinking, what's this? She's doing invisible. Yeah, well, you do know it is an invisible drawing until you add the wax. So we'll do that one. Now, like I said before, we're going to be doing two at once. So you can be leaving one to dry for a bit and or hair drying it in between. So I've waxed it. I'm getting my big brush back. I'm going to go in with the, I think this is the medium one. Let's see. Yeah, and I've got the ink, the water there, ink. I haven't got any ink, because we want it quite light into the sky. So I'm watering it down. Remember, you're doing it nice and loose is what they say. And I'm holding the brush lightly, trying to keep the strokes kind of horizontal to the bottom and the top of the paper. I'm really loosely washing over the page. Get out of it. And it goes a bit too dark, remember, just a bit more water on your brush. Nice and light, or like that, yes. I like some of the drips and things that we're getting creating here already. Okay, so let's now move on to the water. Bit more coffee. Bit more water. I'm not using the strong coffee yet. So again, keeping it quite flat. So this is my medium toned coffee. Oh, I like that. I like the way that's going there. What's gone on here? Let's have a look. Oh yeah, it's okay. So again, keeping it going straight across. Looking very similar there, but we will change it. And then back into the coffee, bit of water. So this is the where the brush, the scruffy brush is. I think I'll move that in a minute because it's getting in the way. And you can see it's starting to pick out. There we are. We've got our sand dune right at the front. Keep going back to your water. Now I do work very quickly. You don't have to work as quickly as this, but it's nice to keep the paint or the coffee moving. That's nice. It's got some nice puddles in it. So I'm going to do that and then do the same, well, different section on another piece. Okay, so that's your next step. So the first one I did is dried off a little. It's not quite as wet. So let's go into the next technique we're going to add in, because we want some more contrast now. So it's all really quite pale. So we want to get something going a bit more like this. Remember we were saying about the working wet in wet and getting some nice dark contrast. So I'm looking at the image and I can see, like, under this big cloud bank here, there's a really nice dark bit and a contrast here. So try and remember, there's my nice thick coffee. So I'm loading the brush up again and I'm going underneath the cloud. So I'm holding the paper still just in case, and I'm really letting it kind of, that technical term, remember, dribble. It's dribbling onto the page. There it goes. Very nice. Yeah, and I want that dark area there. And I'm just letting the paint kind of travel down the brush. Paint, I said it again. The coffee travel down the brush onto the page. Ooh, I quite like these. Oh, that's dramatic. I think I'll leave that bit there. I'm going to go under this cloud here, add in some more shadows. Let's have a look. Ooh, yeah, look at that. Quite happy with that. Right, now looking at the water and the horizon. So there's a dark bit on my image, kind of under the horizon, just there. Let's have a look. Yeah, it's getting on. I do want to get rid of that pencil line as well. Yeah, and there's a few more dark areas in the water. Now I'm using the brush this time at just the point, so you can get this line. You can see where it goes a bit drier and you get a harder line. And I'm trying to move the brush parallel to the edges of the paper to keep this kind of horizontal mark going on. So where it's drier, you'll get a sharper, disappeared, you'll get a sharper line like there. If it gets too wet, sometimes I do use a water spray. This is just some hair product bottle that I've rinsed out and use it. So if it does get hard, sometimes you can use that. Right, so let's start adding in some darker areas. Wet and wet, so we can get those soft edges here and there onto the dune at the front. Whoops, there goes a blob. Oh well. Still we've got the nice contrast. I want dark areas down here. We've got the wax is still resisting, even though I've gone over it once. And remember, be gentle, because if you can see it appearing there, the way it's resisting. Ooh, yeah, it's like magic. If you go too hard over it, sometimes it doesn't work as well. That's much better, isn't it? I really like the contrast we've got going on there. Quite wet. Sometimes it might be a good idea to work on something you can just lift up. Like I'm going to have a job lifting this up without it dripping all over me. So that's the wet in wet. You're going to put that to one side and add your contrast using the wet in wet to your other one, your second piece. Okay, so I'm going to do that now, and then we'll go back to the next technique. Right. Right, so this is the one which has had the dark areas added in, the wet on wet, and I dried it a little bit with a hairdryer and I've left it to dry. It's still quite tacky in some areas, but now we want to work on, I'm going to put some grasses back in now. So, remembering I've got a piece of paper here I can use as a mask, and I've got my scissors. So I'm going to cut into it to create the stencil. So just nice thin, like we did before, thin pieces of grass. And remember, these are just techniques that you learn, and you are obviously creating a piece of work, but it's something you can take your time and go back and do something else. You can use it in future pieces of work. This would work quite nice. Turn it over. This would work quite nice if you were doing like maybe a woodland scene, or if you wanted to do your garden or something totally imaginary, something that you might want to create. That's almost enough of this now. Remember, thin pieces, and then we're going to pull the bits out that we don't want. Whoop. I think these are my daughter's scissors. Yeah, I think so. Right, I think that's about enough of that. Yeah, right. So let's pull some of them out. Whoops. To create our... That's a bit fat at the end there. Let's get rid of that. Create our stencil for our grasses again. So it's starting to come along. Just a square. Whoops. A bit too much there. Never mind. On that. The square tips, and if you get any kind of hard edges, you can just snip into them to create, you want like a nice kind of soft edge stencil. Right, so I've got the toothbrush to hand. Get off, scissors. Right, I've got the tissue, and let's see where we're going to put it. Hope you've all got a space where you can make a mess. I'm lucky I've got this kind of, this is my own space. Oh yeah, right. So I'll put that there and into the strong coffee. Get rid of some of it. And I'm going to spray it on. Now it should give you a harder edge because it is quite a bit drier than the other one, this. And I'm getting quite close when I'm spattering it. And you could use, again, you use this technique with anything if you were, you know, if you wanted to do something colourful. Works really nice, this, just in black and white as well. Got like a nice monochrome. Let's have a look at that. Yep, that's worked. Let's put it in a lighter area so we can see the contrast a bit more. Let's do it there. And again, I'm not copying a photograph that I've got. I'm just, that's nicer. Remember, now this is all covered in the coffee. I can flip it over and let's try, have a look at this area here, if it'll print onto there. So you're trying to put it down without smudging it, if you can. And if it does smudge, no matter, just adds to the effect. Quite a nice natural effect. Let's see what we've got there. Oh yeah, that's made a really nice print effect there. I like that. In fact, I'm going to put it down over here and see what we get and put it on an angle. Try it there. Yep. Right. Just show you the hairdryer I was talking about before. So I've got my hairdryer here. So when I'm using it, I'm going to keep moving it over the surface. So don't do it on one piece too much at one time. So I'll do a little bit and then we can move on. Oops, this is what you want to see. Paint dry. Oh yeah. Right. The final thing that you might want to add in, you can see on this one, two things actually. This has got some brush strokes here, and I was saying earlier about the dry brushing here. So the brush strokes, just adding in detail. So say I wanted to go to the top of this sand dune here and add in some pieces of grass. So this time I've loaded the brush, but then I'm turning it on the edge and getting rid of some of it, and also it brings the brush back to a point because I want this to be a point. Now I'm going to do some flicks, so I'm going to hold the brush really lightly so I can flick up. I want to make some quite natural, back into the coffee, natural shapes. Bit like this, I might need to use darker coffee. Oh yeah, that's better down there. So you can get these tiny little kind of flicks. Remember that closer to you, well at the front where you want it to look like it's nearer to you, make larger marks, and further away make smaller marks, and that gives you a nice feeling of distance. And on my picture I've got like a fence or something about here. I'm going to add that in. Now what I'm doing, as I'm pulling the brush across, I'm putting more pressure on, which gives you a wider mark. So it starts off as a thin mark and then it gets wider. And I want to darken up where it is just under the horizon as well. And you can spend more time adding bits in. I'm going to add a bit more in there and some more little marks. Oh, it's looking nice, that. If you think it's finished, it's finished. Don't keep adding bits to it. Often I've done a piece and I think, oh, just what? No, and I've added too much, and then you've gone too far. You've gone too far. No. So just keep having a look. See, where am I up to? And remember, if you put something on that you're not happy with, I think that bit there is a little bit heavy, you can use your trusty old tissue to just gently dab it away, almost use it like a sponge. Gone a bit light there, so let's add a bit more in. So when you think you've finished this piece, I might add a little bit more to that, but I'm quite happy with this area here. I might, when it's drier, I might put in the fence post there. Okay, but I really like the contrast between, we've got the sky and the sea. Might put some more horizontal marks in there using the point of the brush, and the contrast between that and this kind of rough area at the front. Right, so I hope you've got a good effect. I think I've got a good effect, and I'm pleased with that. Right.